Welcome, and glad you could join us. And we'll start, of course, with a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I'm going to go to the share, and we'll take care of things here. And we were in the middle, as you can see, the Rashi of this, right? And it's talking still about, this is Jacob's encounter on his way, escaping from Beersheva to head to Haran to find Laban, Rebekah's brother. And this is the experience he has. It's very famous, of course, where he sleeps and he sees this vision of a ladder with angels going up and down. We haven't gotten to that yet. We only have, right now we've just got the fact that he was lying down and he'd taken the stones and according to Rashi, he made a kind of a spout, a marzev, to protect himself. And he lay down, he put rested his head on it. And it says, so here we go. Vayishkav bamakom hahu. And he rested in that place. And this is how we interpret it. Lashon mi'ut. Okay. He says, because it says Vayishkav b'makom hahu, because it says in that place, means that as opposed to anything else, any other place. That's how that demonstrative pronoun is being understood here, is what Rashi's telling us, that he rested in that place. It could have just said Vayishkav b'makom. What's the hahu adding, right? So in that particular place, so it is it's a specification, and ba'oto makom shachav, in that place he rested, aval yud dalet shanim, but for 14 years, sheshimesh beveit aver, the 14 years that he served in the house of Aver, lo shachav balayla, he did not rest at night, shehaya osek b'Torah, because he was occupying himself in the Torah. So this may well be surprising to any of you who are not familiar with this comment. If you sort of sort out the chronology with the amount of time, in other words, figuring out how old Jacob was when he left, how many years he served Laban, how old he was when he got back, there's a difference of these 14 years. And the assumption is that he was studying Torah in the yeshiva of Aver, the son of Noah, or at least grandson of Noah. And they talk about the yeshiva of Shem the Aver. Of course, Shem was the son of Noah. Aver, I believe, is his grandson, that they had a yeshiva. So again, these sorts of comments are very suggestive. They go against the grain of people who only read the pshat, and it forces us to sort of say, of course, the question is, what's the point here, or what is it trying to mine out of the Torah? So I realize that, on the surface this appears to be anachronistic, but nevertheless, it's trying to tell us something about the importance of this, and maybe even sort of saying how grounded Jacob was. And also for us, right? For us, what the Torah does for us in terms of linking us and helping us understand what our lives are all about and things like that. So it's interesting, right? So that he was so stimulated by the study of Torah, he didn't sleep. He didn't sleep for those
Who
14
is
years.
Aver?
I think he was a grandson. I think he was one of Shem's sons. I'd have to look it up. Sadly, I have to do the research every time. I can't just remember this from time to time.
But
But
why does it say he spent 14 years in the house of Aver? Because didn't he spend 14 years in the house of Laban?
that was later on. He spent 20 years in the house of Laban.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it has to do with the discrepancy in the chronology, that these 14 years that are unaccountable or aren't accounted for in the chronology given in the Torah when you work it out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to go back now. Because what I have in the in this particular comment by the Toratema is a very practical comment, and I think it really adds to our understanding of what the services are. What are the daily services about? And I know, and I don't mean to sound unsympathetic, that people find the regular service, the fact that it's in Hebrew, the fact that it's repetitious, etc., a great barrier to their wanting or their understanding of what it is to pray. And these particular comments help us understand what the foundation is of this daily service. And I would make a distinction between a service and prayers. So prayers, you can say almost at any given time. They have to do with your desire to try, let's just say for simplicity's sake, your desire to communicate, to somehow be in communication with your Creator, okay? Using shorthand here. Services are a different thing. They have to do with not just a desire on your part. They have to do with having a response to your Creator. In other words, it's a gift you give because you've been asked to give it. We've talked about gifting, and that's the nature of this. So you don't do services because it makes you happy. You do services because in making your Creator happy, it makes you happy. So let's get back in here, because there are two main reasons why we have 3 services a day, why we have these 3 daily services. So, vayifga b'makom. So Rashi has already told us that there's this midrashic interpretation of he reached the place, right? We know that the word makom is sometimes used to refer to God, because God is considered the place of the universe, and the universe is not the place. The universe doesn't contain God. God contains the universe, right? And he reached the universe. Tanya. It's taught in an early, this would be a source that is contemporary with the Mishnah. In other words, prior to the year 200 of this era. Yaakov tikain tfilat arvit. Jacob established the Ma'ariv prayer, that evening prayer. How do we know? Shene'emar vayifga b'makom vayalen sham. Because it has these 4 words, right? In other words, he reached the place, or he reached out to God, and he spent the night there. So right before he retired for the night, he had davened Ma'ariv. He established this particular service. Kiva hashemesh, for the sun had set. So that's the time, right? So now we know the time for Ma'ariv. It is after sunset and the time when you go to sleep, essentially, bedtime. And he goes on to say, En pigia ela tfilah. So we have, it's saying essentially that tfilah, that pigia, reaching here, means prayer. That's what it's saying to the point of pigia has to mean tfilah here. That reaching has to be a synonym for tfilah. How do we know? So there's a verse in Jeremiah, right? Ne'emar Yirmiyahu Zion, 7th chapter of Jeremiah. Va'ata, and as for you, al titpalel vegomer. It says, do not pray. So look at this. It actually takes the word tfilah, etc., and goes on to say, va'al tifga bi, and do not reach out to me. Although it also, in the Jeremiah passage, it could also mean, do not strike me. In other words, Jeremiah is saying that God is telling them, don't. If you're going to act in the way you're acting, this immoral behavior, this degenerate behavior, I don't want to hear your prayers. That's the point that Jeremiah is making. But the point is, we've got this word pigi'ah linked to the word tefillah. So now we go into the Toratema itself. And he does give us a reference. Here we go. And I actually did bookmark this so we can actually take a look at it. But since we are talking about, daily services, I felt it was worth taking this byway into the Toratema. Iyen ma shekatuv. check out what is written be'inyan tfilot avot tiknum, right? With regards to the general topic, the tefillah, that's the Amidah. I did not explain that. But what we're talking about, I said just service, but the essence of the service is the Amidah, right? The series of prayers that starts Eloheinu v'Elokei Avotenu, right? Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, and goes all the way through to Elohei Netzor, or Sim Shalom, or Shalom Rav. That series of prayers that we say standing, and that we try to address God directly. And it's saying that the patriarchs established each one of them. So essentially, Abraham established the morning service, Yitzchak the afternoon service, and Yaakov the evening service. That's the 3 and the 3. So he says, La'el beperik vayera, and it's above. His comment was in Parshat Vayera, the Parsha of Vayera, the pasuk regarding the verse, Vayashkem Avraham baboker. Abraham got up early in the morning. That's the time for Shacharit. El hamakom asher amad sham, to the place where he had stood. And that's specifically chapter 19, verse 27.
What did Isaac had for Mincha? Isaac was praying when his
Rebecca.
future wife was coming to him, and he was praying Mincha.
Yeah, that's how they interpret the verse. Exactly, Harlan. Good memory. Yes, it says lasuach basadeh, and it's understood to mean sicha. Sicha is conversation, to meditate in the field. Okay. V'din tfilat arvit. So this is some additional information, right, regarding the Ma'ariv prayer. It's a little bit different than the other two prayers. And he says, V'din tfilat arvit bifrat mevu'ar ba'orech chaim siman reish lamed hey. And he says the laws regarding the Ma'ariv prayer specifically are explained in Orech Chaim. That's the Shulchan Aruch, right? Orech Chaim, the first of the 4 major sections, and it's divided up into then subsections, and it's section 235. And if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, under that section 235 in the Orech Chaim, you'll find they're talking about the Ma'ariv prayer and the laws concerning it. Uma de Kaimalan, Tfilat Arvit Rishut. And he says the fact that we have a tradition, right, that the Arvit prayer, that the Ma'ariv prayer is Rishut. Okay? So Rishut means that it's a good thing to do, but it's not a mitzvah. Okay, you're not fulfilling a commandment in the way that you would be fulfilling the morning and afternoon, Shacharit and Mincha. It's not that kind of din. It's not that kind of law. Okay, it's a good practice, and in fact, I can tell you, he's not going to tell you, I don't believe. At one point, it was optional. In other words, that's what we're saying. It was optional. But the truth is that at a certain point in Jewish history, the Jewish people took upon themselves that it would now become a chovah, an obligation. Okay? Yeah, go ahead.
Is the Shema itself, which we have incorporated into the Ma'ariv service and in Shacharit as well, but isn't that a commandment?
Yes, it's a separate commandment. We are
Right.
getting now, by deconstructing in the way that we're getting a much better sense of the nature of these prayers. And when I first came across these particular passages, I found it extremely insightful in terms of helping me understand why and what I was trying to accomplish. So that's the reason I'm sharing this with you, in that hope that you'll have a deeper appreciation for what we're doing. Okay? The Shema is part of it. There's a wonderful, in fact, one of the very first Tosafot and first Rashis in Brachot, the very first Masechet of the Mishnah and the Talmud, deals with Kriyat Shema, with the recitation of the Shema and its place in the Ma'ariv service. It is not what defines Ma'ariv as Ma'ariv. It's the Tefillah. Okay? And likewise, in the morning service, it's there to make it, in some ways, maybe I shouldn't use such a term, convenient. All right? Likewise in Ma'ariv. And there's a whole discussion with if you daven Ma'ariv early, before nightfall, because the very first Mishnah in Brachot deals with the time for the evening Shema, and when you recite it, very often we recite Ma'ariv, we can fulfill that obligation before it's technically time to say the Shema. So, but the Shema, the recitation of the Shema and where it stands in our service is a separate mitzvah. It's the mitzvah itself of reciting the Shema morning, when you lie down and when you rise up. But it's not the mitzvah of saying the Amidah is rabbinic. It's rabbinic. It's a rabbinic mitzvah.
I say the Shema when I rise up, and when I go to bed, I say the Shema.
Yes, there's a discussion because there's a practice of reciting the Shema when you go to bed at bedtime, and so that discussion, that very early discussion in the Talmud, is about whether or not which one of these is actually the fulfillment, right, of that obligation, and it's not so simple. Need I tell you? So going on. So we said it's a reshut. Lo nitba'er yafeh hatam. The explanation isn't explained so well. The reason isn't explained so well. V'nir'eh lomar, and it would appear one might appear to say, bazeh al pi ma dekailan ba'eluvin, and we could say regarding this, what is mentioned, what we have had established in the tractate Eruvin, Samach Hey Aleph, page 65a, Haba Baderech, one who is in the way, he's traveling, right? Umin Haderech, or just arrived from having traveled, right? Al Yitpalel Shlosha Yamim, he should not say the Tefillah, he should not say the Amidbah for 3 days. Why? This is, by the way, when I first read this just a few days ago, I was actually, wow. Okay, I don't know that this is halacha l'maaseh. It's simply a statement, right? Should not recite the Amidah for 3 days, mishum she'ir shar lekavein betfilah, because you cannot, you're so distracted by your journey, by all the details of the journey, by the stress of the journey, etc., that you cannot concentrate on the Amidah. And of course, there's a whole perek, there's a whole chapter about how much you're supposed to concentrate when you say the Tefillah. And believe me, it's a great challenge, because here you are standing before God in the Tefillah, and you're supposed to, right? And they use Hannah's prayer that she said when she was in the temple, that we read on Rosh Hashanah, as the classic example of how much concentration you have, to a point where you're saying the words with your lips, but you're so moved, your heart is so full, you can't actually make a sound. That's what you're aiming at anyway. So it's
There's
giving.
a prayer when I went to Israel and came back, there was a prayer that I came back safely. There was a prayer, a small prayer for you, to say.
Omel.
Back.
Tfilat HaDerech, I understand. It's a traveler's prayer, but we're talking about the Amidah. We're talking about a different prayer.
But nobody told me about the Amidah. I didn't know that until just now.
Neither did I, Harlan. And again, just take this with a grain of salt. He's quoting Eruvin. This isn't the Shulchan Aruch, okay? So it's information that tells us something about the need for concentration, and that's what we should understand it as, and not necessarily as that we, next time we take a trip, we aren't going to daven anymore, okay? I mean, for 3 days. That's not the point. I don't think so. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm finding it so interesting because I'm a service leader, but also I go to services. So this just is expanding my mind tremendously. And I just, what a surprise to be coming upon this today. Thank you so much.
Okay, my pleasure. I was hoping you all would enjoy this. The imkain, and if this is the fact, midina haya Yaakov patur melitpalel. If that in fact is the tradition, that if you're on a journey, you're not supposed to do the Amidah, well, the truth is, logically, Jacob would have been patur. He would have been exempt from having to say the tefillah, right? We just said that first, he's saying that we understand, this is the halacha, right? That initially the Ma'ariv prayer was optional, right? And he's saying that the reason it's optional is because when Jacob said it in the evening on his journey, right? He was on his journey when he established this. He was not obligated to say it. Uma shehit palel, and the fact that he did in fact say the tefillah, say the amidah, haytat tefillat reshut. It was something that was permission, right? He wasn't obligated to say it. It was something that he had an option to do it, and he did it. And for that reason, this is so typical Toratema's brilliance, okay? And this is the reason why the tefillah, Ma'ariv tefillah, was considered reshut for future generations, because of the situation that Jacob was in when he established it. Is everybody comfortable with the argument so far?
Yeah, it's kind of neat.
It is very neat, I think, yes. Vezulat zeh, and without this, if we didn't have this particular explanation of it, im hayta chova, were it in fact an obligation, haya mitakna Avraham, because he doesn't stop, right? Had that been an obligation, it would have been more sensible for Abraham to establish it. Had it been an obligatory prayer, why? Kevan dehi rishona letfilot hame'et le'et, because it is the first of the cycle of tefillot. In other words, the cycle of tefillot would start in the evening. Why? Kamosha katavnu, as we said, vahi erev vahi voker. It says, right, the beginning of the day. When does the day begin for the Jews? Right? At nightfall. That's when it begins. So it says, and that's based on Bereshit, Seder Bereshit. And so since Ma'ariv would start in the evening, it said in the evening, it would have been the first of the three prayers. For Avraham haya rishon la'avot, and Abraham was the first of the patriarchs. V'tikein tefillah rishona, and he would have been the first to set up the tefillah, the very first tefillah, v'tikna Avraham. And that is the first tefillah was in fact established by Abraham. Incidentally, I have an alternative explanation, and that in fact contradicts in some ways, or argues with this wonderful explanation he's given, and I'll tell you in a second. The iyen lefanenu, and check ahead, right, or before, reish perik tzav, right, or rather he says before, in other words, to come. The beginning of Parshat Tzav. Na'ir Ord, we will explain further Ta'am Bazeh, the explanation of this. So I don't know what else, I haven't checked that reference, but here's the point, okay? And this is something he says, if we were to go back to that Vayera, you would see. So I said there are two explanations of why we say the Amidah 3 times a day. The other explanation is that it is connected to the Tamidim, to the daily perpetual offerings that were brought on a daily basis. So in other words, the Shacharit corresponds to the lamb that was brought in the morning, and the Mincha represents the lamb that was brought in the evening. And what about Ma'ariv? Well, Ma'ariv, according to the Talmud, represents the time when the remnants of the offerings were burnt off on the altar. And since it doesn't actually correspond to a lamb, would be another reason why it would not be constant, okay? I have something else to say, why Yaakov would have been the one to establish that as opposed to Abraham. And the reason for that is that when it comes to sacrifices, the day begins in the morning. Yes, regularly speaking, the day starts in the evening. But if in fact there is a connection between the sacrifices and the Amidah, and in fact there's even more support for that, because when you look at the Musaf Amidah, that again comes to correspond to the Musaf sacrifice that was brought on Shabbat and the festivals, which is why we do Musaf. So we have these two reasons, and that would be fine for Abraham, therefore, to establish Shacharit, because the lamb in the morning would have been the first sacrifice of the day. So that will bring us very close to our time. So I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording, and thank all of you who are with us. And thank you.